So like I said, I work as the substance use therapist for adolescents in this area. I take referrals directly. So to get your youth connected to mental health, you have to go through the Northgate main intake line to get a referral to the Leduc Clinic for mental health. But with addictions, we really want to reduce the barriers that people experience. And so I take my referrals directly. This is my email, this is my cell phone, and you are more than welcome to reach out if you have any questions or concerns or you're looking for additional support after. Next. So what are we going to talk about? E-cigarette and information. I'm not going to spend too much time on it. There's a lot of information available out there. I recommend going to known websites like the Canadian Centre for Substance Abuse. That's a great website that has a lot of really relevant and well-researched information. E-cigarette use among teens. We're going to talk about the process of addiction and the model of change. And then just some services available for youth. Next. There are a variety of models of e-cigarettes and vaporizers. On the left, the disposable e-cigarette is intended for one-time use only, and they're pre-filled with vape liquids and then discarded once their internal cartridge runs out. So I'm just going to stop the video. Okay, there. Yeah, so they're thrown away as soon as they're used up. One brand that's really popular in Alberta is the Stig, which is kind of similar to a Juul. And it's attractive to teens because of the low price and its popular flavors. Next is reusable cigarettes. They have reusable cartridges in them, and they're typically composed of two parts, a cartridge and a battery. The cartridge contains vape liquid, which the users purchase separately, and then they swap it out once the liquid is completely vaporized. These devices are small and easy to conceal, which makes them really attractive for teens. The pen-looking model that I've seen it come in like a kind of a pink, metallic pink tube, and it looks like a tube of mascara. So they're often really easy to conceal. When I was working in high schools last year, I mean, they were in like pencil cases in high schools, and you wouldn't really have even looked at them twice. The next one are the tank and mods. So these are another type of reusable cigarette, and they're larger devices that are made up of multiple components. These devices can look very different, but most have a cartridge or a tank, and they're attached to a brick-shaped battery. Although they're not as common among teenagers, they are a little bit more discreet, and they are cheaper devices. And they can be used multiple times and modified to customize the vaping experience. So people can turn up or turn down the vapor depending on how much they're wanting to inhale and exhale. So these are really popular for people that are doing tricks with vapes, like cloud chasing, which there's a video and it shows a little bit of that later on. On the very right are pod mods and Juuls. So pod mod is a type of e-cigarette that includes either a pre-filled or refillable pod or pod cartridge full of vape liquid. They're usually very small and compact, and they may be used to vape nicotine, THC, or CBD, and you can charge them at home. They look like a USB drive, and they can get plugged in quite similarly to to your computer, just like a USB device to charge. They're very attractive to teens because they're so small, and they're really, they look very like techy, and because they look like USBs, they're pretty easy to conceal. So with the Juul pod, one thing that we'll talk about is the nicotine, but one Juul pod is equal to 20 cigarettes or 200 puffs. So they're quite strong, the nicotine that's in each little pod. Okay, next. These are the different parts of an e-cigarette. So you have a battery on the very right, and then you have the heating element, which the juice is dropped onto. So it's called a coil, and then you can inhale it through the mouthpiece. So with e-cigarettes that use the coils do break down and need to be replaced. And I think that some of the metal that is showing up in the vapor does come from those coils. So that is something that people are inhaling as it breaks down. Are they safer? Things to consider that we're going to talk about in terms of safe versus safer are the contents of the aerosol that are being inhaled, the production standards, health impacts, and nicotine toxicity and addiction. Next. So we just have a 5-minute video that we're going to watch that I think gives a good overview.
Give me 1 second here. I'm going to share the video. Please let me know, Erin, if you hear the sound, okay? I'm going to just play now.
This is an x-ray of a patient's lungs. And here's an x-ray of those same lungs just 5 days later. See all that light gray? That's fluid, which filled their lungs because of a life-threatening lung disease, linked to vaping. For years, vaping has been touted as a safer alternative to smoking cigarettes. But now, some vaping products are killing people. So what's going on? And is it really bad for you? Vaping typically refers to inhaling an aerosol, which contains either nicotine, in the case of e-cigarettes, or some form of cannabis, such as the psychoactive chemical THC. And in the last few years, it has exploded in popularity, especially among teens. I mean, just look at this graph. It shows the percent of high school students who use e-cigarettes. In 2018, it was over 20%. And that's what makes this news so scary.
A patient died from a severe respiratory illness, and it could be the country's first vaping-related death.
That was in August of 2019. And by early September, the number of reported deaths linked to vaping had climbed to at least 6. Not to mention, there were at least 450 possible lung injuries tied to both THC and nicotine vape pens.
I have been saying this from the beginning. Looks like it's becoming an epidemic.
That's Dr. Melody Prasada, who's treated at least 2 patients with what she calls vaping-associated lung injury.
So over here we are seeing our 18-year-old patient who, when he first presented to the emergency room with chest pain, fever, coughing, and vomiting. And as you see over here, it is the black is for the lungs, and you see nice still black.
But 5 days later, his lungs were filled with fluid because of inflammation, which she said was linked to vaping THC.
Once you come to this point, the chance of dying can be as high as 70%.
So what's causing all that inflammation, all of these lung injuries? The short answer is, we don't really know. Doctors say it's likely not the nicotine or THC itself, but rather other chemicals inside the liquid which get vaporized when you inhale. One possible culprit is vitamin E acetate, which health officials have found inside many vape pens that have been linked to the recent string of lung injuries.
When you start inhaling oils, any type of oil, vitamin E is an oil. Any type of oil, if you start to inhale to your lungs, you are going to create problem inside your alveoli.
Alveoli are small bubbles inside your lungs that transfer oxygen to your blood. And she says that vitamin E could interfere with the lining that surrounds them called pulmonary surfactant. But according to Dr. Mikhail Kazachkov,
I don't think vitamin E is the only guilty, substance here.
Because when it comes to vape pens,
you're going to inhale dozens of other substances, which are not necessarily advertised, but they're there. There is definitely needs to be a carrier, a vehicle, because nicotine cannot be delivered just in a pure form.
Until researchers find out what's behind vaping-associated lung injuries, the CDC says don't vape. But here's the thing. Lung injuries, they're actually not the only risk associated with vaping. One small study, for example, found that kids who used e-cigarettes might be exposed to higher levels of nicotine than those who used traditional cigarettes.
It would not be unusual to have extremely extraordinary high concentration of nicotine in vape.
And
nicotine is not benign.
It raises your blood pressure, which can increase the risk of having a heart attack. And if you're a teen,
it is known to cause problems with the brain development.
Not to mention, it's highly addictive. Now you might be thinking, well, isn't vaping still better for you than smoking? But the answer isn't so simple. You see, smoking is really bad. It kills more than 480,000 Americans each year. And vaporizers, they typically contain fewer toxic chemicals than the 7,000 or so found in cigarettes. But at least in the short term,
There is absolutely no reason to say that vaping is healthier than smoking. In my opinion, vaping is worse because we are scared. We don't know what to do.
so if nothing else, there's probably a better alternative to smoking than vaping. And if you're not already a smoker, you definitely should not start vaping now.
It is at this point very clear that vaping is not only unhealthy, but it is very dangerous. This is not anymore a debate. This is a proven fact that vaping is killing people.
Okay, so I wanted to show that video because I think it gives a overview of the things that we're going to unpack a little bit more in this presentation. There are a lot of conflicting messages that teenagers are given, like around vaping, right? Is it healthy? Is it harmless? Is it harmless water vapor? You know, a lot of times I don't even, I didn't even know kind of what to think about it until I started really exploring it more. But definitely, I think that it's important to understand the concerns that we have with vaping for adolescents. And so I think that that's a really important distinction to make, that this presentation is focused on adolescent e-cigarette use. If I was giving a presentation to adults on harm reduction, adults that are struggling to quit smoking and they're using it as a harm reduction strategy, this would be completely different, a completely different presentation. So I think you need to click on this, Sue, for everything to show up. One more time. Okay. So yeah, at the beginning, I remember hearing about vapes. I think in 2006, we had the Tobacco Reduction Committee that was really focused on addressing tobacco use in Alberta. They came out and gave a presentation, and I thought, oh, this really isn't going to be something that takes off. It's expensive. I don't really see the appeal of it, and man, was I ever wrong. It's definitely something that I've been dealing with in high schools for probably ever since 2006, and it's really rapidly grown. There's a lot of different things that appeal to teenagers that I'll talk about later on, but I think, with the health effects and the way that they presented it initially was that it was harmless. And what we've come to see is that definitely is not the case. So if you look at the very top right, it says e-cigarettes carry a fraction of the risks of smoking. Experts had estimated they are around 95% less harmful than tobacco. So that came out in 2015. And when that study was explored and people delved into it longer, they saw that it was a meeting of 12 people in 2014 that reached this conclusion without citing any specific evidence. There's a lot of information out there that's pseudoscience when it comes to e-cigarettes. It looks like well-researched information, and as you dig into it, you see that a lot of times that the research is funded by big tobacco company, and definitely biased and skewed. So I think that part of that is that we're really fighting against. There's a ton of information on the internet that really does promote vaping to youth. And in that video, you would have seen that gentleman that was doing kind of the O-rings. That's called cloud chasing. And if you YouTube cloud chasing or vape tricks on YouTube, you can spend hours watching people do these crazy tricks with their vapes and the vapor and playing around with it and manipulating it. So definitely, I think that that's one thing that appeals to teenagers, but another one is the technology side of it, right? Teenagers love technology. I have to get my daughter to help me with most of my technology. And so it's another thing, it's another toy for them. Because like I said, with the vapes, you can modify them, you can play around with them. It really is kind of its own little culture in itself. Okay, so can you just go back one, Sue? Okay, no, sorry, it's on. Okay, go ahead, go forward to next one. Okay, there. No, back. Yeah, there you go. Contents of the vapor. So definitely it's promoted as this harmless water vapor. When you look at it, you see there's nicotine, there's volatile organic compounds. We have these ultrafine particles that get really deep into the lungs that cause scarring and inflammation, actually more so than even cigarette smoke. We see heavy metals such as nickel and lead. So definitely some of that can come from the coils. But some of it is already just exists there. We have flavoring such as diacetyl. So that's the flavoring that was linked to popcorn lung because it caused irreversible lung inflammation. But it's like bronchitis basically, but it just never went away because of the scarring and the damage that it did to a person's lungs. And then definitely we know there's at least 5 cancer-causing chemicals in the vapor. Other things that we see in it, propylene glycol, which we don't know the implications of it being vaporized, right? There's a lot of different ingredients in vape juice that we know how it affects the body if it's ingested, like vegetable oil or vitamin E, right? Those things are not an issue. But as soon as you start vaporizing it, you change the compounds, it's going to affect our body different. And so that's what we're seeing, is that these ingredients that are fine for us to use in certain ways are now being vaporized, and they're having pretty significant implications on our health. Other toxins that are also known to be in secondhand smoke, in the secondhand vape, is isoprene, lead, nickel, nicotine, propanol, diacetine, acetone. So definitely not harmless water vapor. And some of the contents are actually, some of the contents of the vapor are the same as what you would find in a conventional cigarette. Some are more. So formaldehyde, we see that that's 10 times higher than in cigarette smoke. Yeah, okay, next. So I think just a cartoon to kind of showcase that, you know, people are vaping these delicious flavors, and a lot of times they don't even know what's in it. There was a poll that was done for adolescents around, what do you think is in your vape juice? And most of them did not know. And because of the lack of regulations around vape juice, they don't even have to list the ingredients. They don't have to put what levels they're at. It really is an unknown as to what is in the vape juice. Okay, next. So we know that vape users have a higher odds of cancer, cardiovascular disease. I think it's 2 to 5 times higher to have a heart attack. Lung disease, definitely if you have some underlying condition like asthma or COPD, that can be exacerbated. Stroke, depression and anxiety, circulatory problems, and then also issues with gum and tooth health. So while e-cigarettes deliver lower levels of carcinogens than conventional cigarettes, they're likely less carcinogenic than conventional cigarettes. They do still have carcinogens in them, right? And so the carcinogens are the cancer-causing agents. So they're still in there, maybe not to the same extent, but they're definitely still in there. Daily e-cigarette users were almost twice as likely to have a heart attack. Dual daily e-cigarette and cigarette use was associated with almost a 5 times increase in risk for heart attack. A lot of times when somebody is using e-cigarettes, well, research has shown that when somebody's using e-cigarette to quit smoking, what most often happens is that they end up smoking and vaping. And that's actually worse than just continuing to smoke, because there are certain chemicals in cigarette smoke, there are certain chemicals in vapor, and when you double up and use the two together, you're really increasing your chances of these health risks. So e-cigarette use was associated with a doubling of risks of symptoms with chronic bronchitis among high school juniors and seniors in the States in a research study. Increased diagnosis of asthma, and they were more likely to have days absent from school due to severe asthma symptoms. One thing that we know with smoking, that's also similar with vaping, is that it suppresses the immune system. So there was a study that was done where some mice were exposed to MRSA, and then different mice were exposed to vape smoke and then MRSA, and we saw an increase of mice that contracted MRSA. So I think that, oftentimes when we're talking to high school students about health, it kind of just goes over their head. They think, oh, it's not going to be me. Don't worry, I'm not going to get addicted. But if we have somebody that already has a compromised immune system, certainly with the concerns of COVID, if they already have heart conditions, these are things that are definitely going to just increase the risk of health implications. I had a young man he had open heart surgery when he was an adolescent. I think he was maybe 12 when he had surgery, and he was vaping quite a bit. Great hockey player, very athletic, but the stress of the nicotine, because nicotine is a stimulant, the stress that it put on his heart, one of his valves actually started leaking, and so he really had to quit vaping. It impacted his hockey playing. We've seen this with high school students that were in volleyball, where it was really affecting their performance. So like that video was also talking about, we had the lung and pulmonary disease outbreak last year. Respiratory symptoms included cough, shortness of breath, or chest pain. And we saw some GI symptoms as well, like nausea or vomiting, and non-specific constitutional symptoms like fatigue, fever, or weight loss. So symptoms typically developed over a period of days, but could sometimes manifest over several weeks. And sometimes the GI symptoms came before the respiratory symptoms. So in Alberta Health Services made this a reportable disease, a notifiable disease, and sent letters to physicians in provinces asking about e-cigarette use and to report any cases. So a theory was, like they said in that video, that vitamin E acetate, maybe too much propylene glycol or vegetable glycerine. So vegetable glycerine is something that we can ingest and be okay, but as soon as you start vaping it, it's changing the compounds and it's going to impact your lungs. And then just talking about depression, anxiety, and emotional problems. Anxiety or feelings of panic or worry is really common among adolescents. And because anxiety is a common sign of nicotine withdrawal, vaping can actually trigger these symptoms in users. So it can actually exacerbate some anxiety if they already have underlying anxiety issues when they're trying to quit. Depression is also characterized by feelings of sadness, hopelessness, and fatigue. And because vaping and nicotine can interfere with brain development, teenagers who vape may have a higher risk of depression than others. So I always tell people, there's a consequence to substance use. When we're using something to elevate our mood, the price of that is that we're going to feel the equal and opposite reaction when we're coming off of it. So e-cigarette users are twice as likely to be diagnosed with depression than the general population. And those who vape more frequently are more likely to have depression than those who vape less often. Okay, next, Sue. So production standards are very subpar when it comes to e-cigarettes. It really hasn't been addressed, I think, to the level that maybe it should have been. Maybe it was kind of similar to me where I thought, you know, this really isn't going to be something that takes off, and then all of a sudden it did. We really don't have a lot of regulation around it. And you know, when we're buying, when I do presentations to youth, I say, like, when you're buying food or you're buying a drink, we know what's in that. They have to list the ingredients, they have to list the nutritional kind of benefits. And with e-cigarettes, there really just doesn't seem to be the same expectation or the same level of regulation. So when you're testing vape juices, oftentimes the ingredients in them really vary depending on where they're made, who's making them. I've seen youth kind of make their own, and you really never know what a person's going to get. Okay, next. So this is a vape that exploded in 2016 when Tyler was using it. He was in Lethbridge with his dad. And yeah, it just exploded. And then we heard about other incidents where people were on planes and they were exploding in their back pocket, or in different areas exploding in their back pocket. And so again, I think it just highlights the lack of regulation around it. You know, it's hard to say why they were exploding. I think that the ones that were modified seemed to be less stable and more likely to explode, but there were also a few that exploded that hadn't even been modified or changed. I always talk about the interesting part that he was with his dad. So Tyler is 16, and so he was vaping with his dad in the truck. And students often find that really interesting, that, you know, they were vaping together, and how did that kind of play out? And was it that, you know, his dad bought it for him, or he was trying to quit smoking, or we don't really know the backstory of it, but the poor guy, you know, he was really quite injured from it. It blew out his teeth, and it really badly burnt his tongue. Next. So nicotine content varies in the vape juice. Just 1 second here. And you can get vape juice that says 0% nicotine. And so I will have youth that say, you know, I don't want to mess around with nicotine. I don't want to get addicted, but I do enjoy the tricks. I do enjoy kind of the culture of it. I enjoy the taste of it. The problem is, again, because lack of regulation, that half of Canadian products labeled as nicotine free actually contain some level of nicotine. I think that in the study they took 500 different samples, and they found varying levels of nicotine. So again, you know, these youth are trying to make kind of safer choices by not getting juice that has nicotine in it, but lack of regulation, nobody's policing the fact that they did have nicotine in it. And I mean, if you think about big tobacco companies or tobacco companies in general, really it is in their best interest to try and get people addicted to nicotine, right? Because that's what keeps a person coming back. That's where they make their money. Nicotine in itself is a really interesting drug. When you look at the levels of addictive substances, there's tier 1, 2, and 3. Tier 1 is the most addictive substances, and nicotine is in the tier 1 category. So it's a highly addictive drug. It's in there with alcohol and heroin. So, you know, I think that nicotine often kind of slides under the radar because people are really focused on these drugs that make it into the news, like fentanyl and meth. But the reality is nicotine kills more people than fentanyl and methamphetamine and those other substances. Next. So when you look at nicotine, the drug, when it's used, the middle category, that is the neurotransmitters that are released. And then on the right is how those neurotransmitters affect us. most often drugs fit into kind of either stimulants, depressants, or hallucinogens. And nicotine kind of has a little bit of both stimulant and depressant properties. So dopamine, that's our pleasure center. Anything that you like, you can thank dopamine because of that. Noradrenaline is our adrenaline. It wakes us up. But then you also have serotonin, which modulates our mood, right? So you don't have these high highs or these low lows. And then if you look down, endorphin and GABA, it's reduction of tension and anxiety. So when you look at nicotine, it has this really impactful way of kind of working with our brain and changing our brain, and our brain likes to be changed. But then also when people are using nicotine, whether it's smoking or vaping, they're taking these really big, relaxing breaths. When we get stressed out, we start breathing really shallow. And when we start breathing really deep, relaxing breaths, we actually start relaxing. And so smoking and vaping actually get us to take really effective, long, deep breaths. But then also people are often leaving their situations that are stressing them out, right? So at work, people go outside to have a cigarette, or I don't even know if they have smoke rooms anymore, but when I used to work at the airport, they had a smoke room. Or youth would go to the bathroom. And so that's where we saw a lot of vape use in high schools, is in bathrooms. And, they would step out of class, which was maybe just kind of not stimulating them, or they were feeling stressed out. They would go to the bathroom. That in itself was relaxing them, but then also the combination of these big relaxing breaths, and then also taking this drug into your brain that reduces anxiety and tension. It really is a very intoxicating effect overall. So not only are they using a highly addictive drug, but they're using it in the most addictive way possible. So oftentimes people think that injection drug use is the most addictive way of drug use. It's actually inhalation. So when people are smoking substances, it takes about 7 seconds to move from the lungs to the brain. So that's a really quick effect, whereas injection takes about, it can take, 14 to 40 seconds, I think it is. So it doesn't, it's still quite an effective way of using substances, but really inhalation is the quickest way to get something into a person's brain. So fastest and easiest drug to get addicted to by far is nicotine. Next. This shows the release of nicotine as compared to earlier cigarettes, right? So at the bottom, you see this kind of like, a little bit of a gradual increase and then get gradual decrease over time. Pall Mall cigarettes, and then when you look at Juul, so you have this really significant increase of nicotine in the blood over a short amount of time. And they worked very hard to get it that way. Juul really wanted they wanted to have the quickest way to get nicotine into the system. And they figured it out. They were successful in that. So the implication of that is a main reason that youth like using vapes is they get this head rush, and this is where they get the head rush from. So they kind of get lightheaded, a little bit woozy, maybe a little bit drunk, and then it kind of gradually subsides. Okay, next. Nicotine toxicity. Definitely calls regarding nicotine toxicity has went up to the Poison Control Center. When you have juice laying around, you have a little bottle of juice laying around, it smells like bubble gum or gummy bears or whatever kind of flavor it is, that is really enticing to little kids. And so we're kind of seeing the same thing with edibles, right? Where they're taking a drug and they're kind of they're appealing to youth with the candy flavoring. And it can be quite toxic to children. And so whenever I do presentations to adolescents. I always talk to them about the importance of putting their vape juice away, like securing it, keeping it out of reach of little kids. A lot of times I think adolescents also get nicotine toxicity, maybe low levels of nicotine toxicity, but they don't realize it, right? So nausea, I've heard of that quite a bit, where they're using their vape and then all of a sudden they just feel really sick and really unwell, and they don't understand that they've kind of given themselves that nicotine toxicity or low level of nicotine overdose. So a child can be killed by a very small amount of nicotine. Just one highly concentrated teaspoon can be enough. E-cigarette calls were more likely than cigarette calls to include a report of an adverse health effect following exposure. Yeah. Symptoms include vomiting, sweating, dizziness, increased heart rate, lethargy, seizures, and difficulty breathing. Okay, let's go on to youth and vaping. I think we've talked about this quite a bit. Vaping really was to appeal. Well, initially vaping was developed to help people quit smoking, or as a harm reduction strategy for people that couldn't quit smoking. So people continue smoking because of the nicotine, but what kills them is the smoke from cigarettes, right? Because of all the tar and the cancer-causing carcinogens. So what they wanted to do is be able to address the nicotine addiction and get rid of all of those cancer-causing carcinogens, which they did. Vaping, when you look at vaping as a harm reduction strategy, what we know right now is that it is safer than cigarette smoking. But in order for it to be safer, you have to smoke 10 or more cigarettes in a day. You need to be an adult, and you need to completely transition to vaping to have a safer, to kind of use that harm reduction approach, right? So if somebody's saying, oh, I'm going to use a vape to be safer and I'm going to smoke at night, that wouldn't be considered harm reduction. You need to completely transition to vaping, and then that would be a safer approach. But with youth, we would not use vaping as a harm reduction strategy, for the simple fact that very few of them are addicted to smoking, to cigarette smokes. We know that Alberta did a great job, or even Canada as a whole did a really great job at targeting smoking among adolescents. Rates went down, they were really low, and what we're seeing with vaping is that now smoking is actually starting to go up. For some reason, it seems like youth they start vaping and then they slowly transition to smoking. If they continue, if they vaped long term, they're more likely to transition onto smoking. So youth like it because of the image. They're playing around with the image, they're trying to kind of become their own person and individualize. It's a great peer connection. We see that with people that smoke, right? They're going out and smoking together. There's like this kind of community around it. They use it as a coping strategy, can be a hobby or interest. And who doesn't love flavor, right? If you can get all these different flavors to play around with. Next. Teen brain development really result in, I think, a vulnerability to substance use. We know that kids are more likely to start experimenting with substances and different things, right? They're going to cut their hair, they're going to start changing up their appearance during adolescence. And so during adolescence, because of this brain development, there is a greater risk-taking happening. There's less planning and judgment, and they have less inclination to consider the consequences of one's behavior. So they're quite impulsive, they're sensory seeking, they're trying on new hats, new identities, and definitely we see substance use as part of that experimentation phase. Okay, I'm not going to talk too much about brain development next. Common reasons for starting. They're curious. And I would say this is, kind of universal to any substance, right? They like the smell, definitely that social bonding activity. They want to fit in, convenience. We see youth using it in class, right? They just slip it down their sleeve. and they can quickly take a little puff of it and blow it down the front of their sweater, and they can be really sneaky in that way. I would actually say though that this year I've seen a reduction in vape use among teenagers in school, and I think part of that is with the COVID restrictions, with masking, with breaks, with bathroom breaks being more structured. I think that it's dissipated it quite a bit. Also, it's a social currency, right? Just like phones are social currency with teenagers. Everybody loves having the phone in their back pocket. Vape can be part of that as well. Next. Cigarette companies, they know that 50% of their chronic users are going to die from tobacco-related illnesses. And so they wanted youth to be their replacement smokers. When you look at the flavorings, they're definitely geared towards adolescents. I mean, when you look at even the images or the advertisement, they show young people that show, that like talk about being freedom and individuality, and they're all, beautiful looking young people. So they really wanted to, they took exactly the same strategy that they used to sell cigarettes in the past, and they've just applied it to vaping, totally same. So what we know, if youth use continues this way at the same rate that it is right now, 1 out of 13 youths could die as adults, right? Because it's so popular among them right now. And the more likely, the younger adolescent is exposed to a substance, so whether it's alcohol or marijuana or tobacco, the more likely they're going to have a lifelong, the more likely they are to misuse it, right? So they would be at a higher risk for addiction. So if a youth is using a substance before the age of 14, they have a higher risk for addiction down the road. Next. Process of addiction. A lot of times, in society, we have black and white thinking. Either people are kind of using and it's fine, or people are addicted. The reality is there's different levels of substance use, from not using to socially using once in a while without negative consequences. Misuse is when they start using it to feel good or stop feeling bad. So they're starting to use it as a coping strategy, experimenting with different things. They start to see it affect their grades or their activities. Abuse is when there's ongoing use. They're using alone. They continue using in spite of negative consequences. So youth that get caught at high school vaping, and they continue vaping in high school in the exact same way, that's a red flag, because we're supposed to be able to alter our behavior to avoid further negative consequences. And when somebody doesn't do that, that means there's something more at play. And then on the very right, dependency, which is addiction. And so definitely look at the physical dependency. With nicotine, it's very tricky, because withdrawals can start, if somebody is addicted to nicotine, withdrawals can start 30 minutes after their last use. And so that's really hard to identify for people, because they just start thinking, oh man, people are really starting to irritate me. Class is really starting to get annoying, or I'm feeling overwhelmed. They just kind of feel out of sorts, and they just think, oh, I think I'm just going to go and, go in the bathroom and use my Juul or vape or whatever, right? So they don't actually notice it as withdrawal symptoms. They just think, oh, I'm starting to get more stressed out. Next. Signs of use. We know our kids. If you start seeing changes in, adolescents go through changes, definitely. If you see something out of the norm for adolescent behavior change, I would really encourage you to talk to them about it. If you start seeing weird electronic devices around your house, they're really thirsty all the time, chronic coughing, if they're really paranoid or secretive, unexplained sweet smells. I had a teacher that said, this is junior high, and so if you're walking through a classroom or you're walking through the hall and you smell strawberry, that is not what a junior high usually smells like. Something is going on. Somebody is vaping around. And loss of taste. Next. Not going to spend too much time on these, just different stages that people go through to make changes. Go to the next one. The first stage is when somebody's not interested in making changes. They're defensive. They want you to leave them alone. You can listen, understand their concerns, highlight the the negatives of what you're seeing, highlighting the concerns that you have. Next. Contemplation. Maybe they have a concern about it. It's a red flag, but they're not ready to change. Okay, maybe I am vaping too much, but I don't want to do anything about it right now. What we can do is we can listen, we can express empathy about difficulty in changing. I think we can all connect with the struggle in changing any kind of area of our life, and help building up their self-efficacy and ability to change. Next. Preparation. This is when they decide to change. I want to make a change. What do I need to do? So what we can do is we can start offering them strategies. Would you like to go see a substance use therapist? Maybe we can look up different ways to deal with triggers. What are the situations that make you crave the most? So starting to develop a plan with them. Next. Action is when they're following through with that plan. We just want to be their cheerleader and supportive of them. If they relapse or they stumble, we want to be supportive that it's normal to struggle to make change, especially with a highly addictive substance. Typically people try to quit smoking 7 times before they're successful. So that's a really high rate of relapse. Next. And then maintenance is when they're just maintaining the change. Next. Okay, tips for educating youth. Can you just click through? There's supposed to be some circles that show up. 2, 3, one more. Okay, that's it. Okay, so we want evidence-based information. I really don't support fear-based change, because it's just not long-term change, right? I know that you hear certain myths around substances, like if you use methamphetamine once, you're going to become addicted. It is a highly addictive substance. I will give them that. But the thing is, as soon as we start saying things like that, our youth know somebody that is using it in a way that discredits what the information that we're giving them, right? So we want to give them evidence-based information. We don't want to be judgmental. Open up dialogue. We don't want to make decisions for our youth in all areas at this point, right? They definitely still need some guidance, and we're kind of the barriers on the side of the road to kind of help them navigate life, but they really do need to be empowered to make some decisions on their own. And so, a lot of times, like asking them, what do you think about it? I read this article. What do you think about it? Or watching videos. There's a great CBC video called Welcome Back Big Tobacco. There's another series on Netflix called Broken. Episode 2 is on Jewel. Watching those things with them, and what do you think about that? What's the good and what's the bad, and kind of helping guide them with their decision making. So definitely inclusion of harm reduction. I had a young fellow that he was smoking a pack of cigarettes a day since he was 12. He grew up in Turkey. So for him, vaping was harm reduction. Definitely wanted to move towards more of an abstinence base for him, but when he was able to totally substitute a pack of cigarettes a day with vape, that we would consider that successful harm reduction. Ongoing education available to youth. So again, we don't want to tell them what to think. They're going to push back at that. We want to help them explore information and guide their decision making. Next. Quick tips, 4 Ds: drinking water, deep breathing exercises, delaying the decision, and distraction. These are really great tips for youth to quit. The reality is they have amazing brain and body that heals itself a lot faster than us adults. And so a lot of times they don't even need nicotine cessation. They don't need the patch. They don't need gum. I mean, definitely if that's going to help them, go get it. that's more successful than a vape to quit smoking. Those are well researched tobacco cessation strategies, but you know, these are different strategies just to kind of get through that craving in the moment. So delaying the decision. If you vape at lunch, you know what, I'm not going to vape at lunch, I'm going to vape after school. After school comes, you know what, I'm going to wait till I get home. You go home, okay, I'm going to wait till before bed. You just keep on kind of delaying it. It's a way of kind of tricking your mind and then distracting yourself. Okay, next. Different ranges of services. We have outpatient services all the way to stabilization, which is our 6 to 10 day detox program. And then we have 3-month residential treatment programs. And we always work least intrusive to most intrusive. And next. And we'll just go one more, Sue. Next one. Okay, there we go. Okay, so that was a fast and furious presentation on vaping. Hopefully your brain doesn't feel too overwhelmed. These are the services that are available. Youth addiction services are our main addiction service, but it's all the way on the west side of Edmonton over by Westmount Mall. Rutherford Health Center, they also have walk-in services and they have addiction counselors there as well. Or like I said, you are welcome to reach out to me.